demonstrative so that he's
Yeah.
at the table,
You should wait till they go to use
so
it.
that then,
You should just ask, can I reposition when they begin to use these?
And then you sit down, yeah, you're sitting down the whole time, and then you can just naturally stand up. So you ask at the very beginning, but then you move whenever.
Commissioner, relocate when they start using the demonstrative?
Yes.
If necessary, when they use the demonstrative.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Would you please introduce yourself?
my name is Michael Pennington.
Mr. Pennington, what do you do for a living?
Well, I own my own business. We do forensic analysis on phones and computers and all sorts of different types of technology.
How'd you get involved in this technology work?
Well, I'd always been kind of a computer nerd, so I was interested with technology and what makes phones and computers work. And as specifically cell phones became more widespread, a need for data analysis and forensics on them just created a job opportunity for me. So I opened my own business and seized on that opportunity.
Where did you go to school?
I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology.
What kind of specialized training do you have in this field?
Well, I have a degree in computer forensics, and I've also spent pretty much the last 10 years of my career participating in trainings and education courses relating to forensics, cell phone data analysis, and all sorts of cell phone tracking technologies.
Do you have any specific certifications?
Yes, ma'am. I'm currently certified as a forensic data examiner.
And have you ever been published in any articles relating to this field?
Yes, ma'am. Several articles, and I've also written 2 textbooks on the topic of forensic data analysis.
Focusing your attention on today's case, what did you review in coming to your conclusions?
Well, in this case, we're dealing with just one cell phone, so I was able to pull the records from that cell phone and use those during my investigation.
And what methods did you use when analyzing these records?
Well, I applied the same methods that I use in all my forensic analysis cases. Those involve looking at the cell phone records and taking whatever forensic data I can get from those records and applying it to the needs of the case.
Is this method acceptable in the industry?
Yes, ma'am. I've used it over 150 times.
And were you able to reliably use this method for the case today?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time we would tender Mr. Pennington as an expert in forensic data analysis.
Any objection to Mr. Pennington being qualified as an expert in forensic data analysis?
No objection, Your
Without
Honor.
objection, Mr. Pennington will be so entered and qualified. You may proceed.
Mr. Pennington, why is an expert like yourself typically called to court?
Well, usually when I'm called in, there are questions as to either the data on a phone that can't be accessed or to the location of a specific phone at a period of time.
And what was the concern for today's case?
In today's case, we were dealing with the actual location of a phone that was registered to Mr. Wallace on the day that this crime occurred.
You just mentioned Mr. Wallace. Is this the cell phone record that you have that you reviewed?
Yes, ma'am, that is the cell phone record I reviewed.
And after you had this cell phone record, what other steps did you take to come to conclusions?
Well, there's a lot of information contained in this cell phone record. It goes through the date and times of certain calls, how long those calls took place, and the cell phone tower locations that the phone used when making those phone calls.
Did you create anything yourself to help you in analyzing this?
Yes, ma'am. Specifically the tower locations. I took the cell phone tower locations, which are public knowledge. You may see the cell phone towers out in certain neighborhoods and areas of the city. I took those cell phone towers and overlaid them on a map of the area right around Ms. Eigenbrott's home.
Would you recognize this map if I presented it to you?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Permission to approach the witness with a map that he created?
Yes.
This isn't the right one. Mr. Pennington, what did I just hand you?
Yes, ma'am. This is the map that I was just referring to. It has a satellite image of, looks like the whole Kannapolis area and the cell phone towers in the area.
Does it seem to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, ma'am.
Hasn't been altered in any way?
No, ma'am, not since I created it.
Your Honor, at this time, defense moves Exhibit 1, Defense 1 into evidence?
Any objection to defense exhibit one?
No objection.
Without objection, defense exhibit one will be entered into evidence.
Your Honor, permission for Mr. Pennington to step down and use a blown-up version of this map?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Pennington, explain to us exactly what we're looking at here.
Yes, ma'am. So this was the map I was just talking about. As you can see, this is a satellite image with the roads, certain specific areas, and the victim's home all pointed out. And I also overlaid the cell phone tower locations, which are these red triangles.
Can you explain to us exactly how these cell phone towers work?
Yes, ma'am. So each of these cell phone towers is three-sided. As you can see, that's why I used a triangle. From these cell phone towers, I have these red lines coming out, which show the specific area that, based on the cell phone records, Mr. Wallace's phone was in at a certain time.
I'm a little bit confused about how these cell phone towers work. Could you visually show us on the whiteboard?
Yes, ma'am. So, as I said, a cell phone tower typically is three-sided. So we start with a triangle. These cell phone towers send out signal in a 360-degree area right around that tower. I'll show you that, hopefully here with this compass. Alright, so this 360-degree circle would be the area where this cell phone tower gives signal to a cell phone.
So then where do these red lines come into play?
So the red lines actually set out different segments in this 360-degree circle. I'll draw those on here. Now each of these different segments is listed on the call log. It'll say the name of the tower and which segment of the tower that was used. From that you can tell an estimate of the location of a phone at a certain time when a call was made.
What are the names of these different wedges?
Let's see here, they all use fancy Greek names, or Latin names, or some names. Alpha, gamma, and beta.
And are these different wedges permanently set?
Yes, ma'am. On all cell phone records that I've reviewed during my time, you get the name of the cell phone tower, and then which, either the alpha, the beta, or the gamma sector that the phone used.
Okay, now that I've got a little bit of a better understanding, can you explain again then exactly how that applies to this map that we're looking at?
Yes, ma'am. So the red lines on this map show the actual segment of the 360-degree signal area that Mr. Wallace's phone used at a certain period of time. For example, these two lines mean that at the time a call registered on the 764A tower, Mr. Wallace's phone was somewhere in this arc.
Let's talk about exactly where Joshua's cell phone tower pinged. What entry did you focus in on the most for your investigation?
Well, based on my investigation into the crime that occurred on July the 20th, I looked at phone calls right around 2 o'clock in the morning. Based on the call records, there was only one call that was within moments of 2 o'clock in the morning, and that was at 1:58 a.m.
Will you indicate that time by the tower that it pinged to?
Yes, ma'am. The call that registered on Mr. Wallace's phone at 1:58 a.m. was picked up by this Carolina 764A tower at 1:58 that morning. Specifically, it was picked up in the gamma sector.
Now, you said that Josh could be located anywhere in that wedge, am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So at the closest point of that wedge, how far away was that from the victim's home?
So from this point right here, this would be the closest the closest area where his phone could have been and registered still on this tower. From this point, right here at the end of this red line by the 764A tower, it's close to 5,000 feet or 1 mile from the victim's home.
And from this point to the victim's home, are there any direct streets?
No, ma'am. Based on this map, there are no direct streets or highways that would connect the end of this line to the victim's home.
What does this map indicate this area to be in between the two locations?
It looks, based on this map, to be a very suburban or residential area with lots of neighborhoods.
Now, at the furthest point of this wedge, how far is that from the victim's home?
The furthest point in this arc would be all the way down here, just south of Lake Fisher, right at the end of this red line. Now, at that point, you're dealing with a distance of about 9,000 feet, which would come out to close to 2 miles. Put 1.75 here. That's the distance from this point to the victim's home.
And is there a direct route from this point to the victim's home?
No, ma'am. Again, we have these two lakes here, and the neighborhoods we were talking about, all that separate the far part of this arc from the victim's home.
So at 1:58 a.m., where was Josh Wallace?
He would have been somewhere, based on the cell phone records, in this arc.
And how far would that place him from the victim's home?
It would be between 1 mile at the closest and 1.75 miles at the furthest point.
Thank you. Permission for the witness to take his seat.
Yes.
Would opposing counsel like me to keep the demonstratives? Permission to preserve the demonstrative?
Yes.
Mr. Pennington, you just testified that you can tell where the defendant was located within the wedge, correct?
I can tell you that he was within that wedge.
This is based on the tower the cell phone connects to.
Yes, sir, that's right.
But you stated in your affidavit you can't tell the precise location.
No, based on the actual phone that Joshua Wallace had, it wasn't a newer phone, so it didn't have GPS or Wi-Fi connectivity that would allow you to pinpoint an exact address. So, because it was older, we were relying on the cell phone towers.
So you can't tell how close he was to the actual tower.
No, based on the technology that was available, all I can say is that he was within that wedge at the time that call was made.
I'm showing the defendant what has been previously marked as Exhibit 6. Show the witness permission to approach him.
Yes.
On page 2 of Exhibit 6, it says in those two highlighted areas, 2 phone calls were made, correct?
Objection, hearsay.
What's your response?
Your Honor, this is just a printout of the phone records which they actually relied upon in their previous demonstrative, as well as there is no human declarant behind this. The entire process is machination.
Well, let's identify what this is before you start asking questions about it, and then we can go from there. So overruled, but
This is the call log that you relied upon, correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Does it look to be, it's not altered in any way, correct?
No, these are the track phone records I used.
At this particular time, Your Honor, I would like to enter this call log into evidence.
any objection?
Hearsay.
All right. Overruled. Exhibit 6 will come into evidence.
Don't you want to hear my argument?
No.
I worked very hard on it.
There's on that particular call log, at 14:06, there are 2 phone calls, correct?
Yes, sir, that's right.
Those 2 phone calls were made from 2 different towers.
At 14:06, yes, there was a call picked up at the A231 tower and the Carolina 461B tower.
Carolina A231 tower is here, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Carolina 461 is right here.
That's right.
These two towers are over 2 miles apart.
That's right.
But you said that you can testify that the defendant was within a tower wedge at the time the phone call was made, correct?
Well, I can tell you that his phone used or was picked up on those towers at the time the phone call was made.
But you said earlier that if it's picked up on that tower, it's within this wedge.
That's right.
But these wedges don't overlap.
They don't, no.
But at that particular moment, he was picked up off of 2 different towers.
He was.
So you're saying that he can be within this wedge and this wedge at the same time.
Well, there are also time constraints with these records. When you're talking about cell phone towers and specifically the technology that TracFone uses, their towers at some points experience such high traffic that phone calls are often kicked from one tower to another. So at that point, especially we're dealing with 14:06, so 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a very high traffic time usually for cell phone towers. So let's say the A231 tower was just bogged down, lots of calls being made. His call didn't go through, which is indicated by the 0-minute call time. He places the call again, tries to get it to go through. It pings to another tower because that tower is not as bogged down. It gives him a better chance of being able to complete that call.
But you don't have any records of the cell phone tower network load.
No, I don't.
So he actually could have been at the victim's home at 1:58 because of network load.
Well, usually when you're talking about calls placed after midnight, and especially in this area, based on my experience and all the investigations I've done, after midnight the cell phone traffic on these towers goes down, and you don't experience the kickbacks jumping from tower to tower.
But you don't know that.
Well, I do know that.
What evidence you haven't provided any evidence as to that the cell phone tower network load in your report?
It's all based on my investigations. I've completed 160 of these investigations into cell phone records and towers, and I know what the network loads typically are, especially in the Kannapolis area.
You testified earlier that this is an urban area.
I wouldn't say urban. I would say suburban. It's more residential.
So there's more people in this location than in typical other locations.
I don't know.
The amount of people in an area would affect network load.
It would. That's right.
So in an urban place where people live, naturally there'd be more people there than in a country or in the woods.
That's fair to say.
But based on network load, he pinged off the cell phone tower 2 miles away
I'm sorry. At which time are we talking?
at 14:06. Based on network load, you said he would have been pinged off. It's possible to be pinged off of 2 towers 2 miles away.
Yes, sir. Based on these records, it looks like a call was made. That call couldn't actually be completed because the network was so bogged down with the A231 tower. So he placed another call at that time. It looks like that time it was to a different number, but that time it kicked to the the 461B because that tower wasn't being used as heavily.
You testified on direct, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you testified that if it pings off a tower, they have to be within that wedge because the tower's reach ends at the end of that red line.
If it pings off a tower, and based on the 158 call, I don't have any evidence here that the network was bogged down at that point. So it's based on my investigation, his phone call was inside that arc at the time the call was made at 158.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Pennington, there's a bit of confusion about all the other cell phone towers. Why are there so many cell phone towers in this area right here?
Well, there are two main reasons. Cell phone companies, as cell phones have become more widespread, they put more towers out there so that when you make a call, it doesn't come up. Call cannot be completed, or it just won't go through at all. And the second reason is that in this area, the homes are kind of scattered throughout neighborhoods. We have towers on the one side, I believe that is the A231 tower, and based on that map, that's not a densely populated area. Now, down the 2053 and the 764A towers are both within, look like subdivisions or neighborhoods, and that would explain why the towers are closer together in that area.
So would these towers overlap service?
At some points, yes.
And this tower you said is in what kind of area?
It looks like it's more on the outskirts of town. That's why it's covering a bigger area.
Now, opposing counsel was very concerned about a ping that occurred at 1406.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, is it possible for that ping to have occurred right here?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And would this ping be within the wedge of Carolina A213?
Yes, ma'am.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any, no recalls. All right, witness may step down.
Permission to remove the